Hello, everyone. I am Liz Cross, psychic medium and remote viewer. Today's date is March 26, 2023, and we are so lucky. Let me tell you guys are so fortunate today. Why, Liz? Why do you say that? Well, because we have Graham Nicholls with us. Now, those of you that have been following me for a long time, you will remember the interview that I did with Graham a couple of years ago, and it was absolutely phenomenal. Graham is back with us today. For those of you who do not know who Graham is, I will tell you just briefly, and then he can fill in all the questions for us. Graham Nicholls is an English author as well as a lecturer and an advisory board member for the Rhine Research Center in the USA. He is a leading practitioner and researcher into out-of-body experiences. So, Graham, welcome. I know it's early for me. Maybe you're having a residual time change problem, but how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good, thanks. It's good to be here.
Does the time change ever affect you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure it's very necessary, but yeah, they do it every year. So
yeah, no, but psychically, the time change actually really affects me. It tends to make things kind of shift. You can feel like a shift in the timeline, or it's weird. I can't really explain it very well, but I can feel a shift. Now, Graham, your website, which is grahamnichols.com, what are your offerings on there, just for everybody to know?
Well, it has a video course which teaches all of the methodologies that I use for inducing out-of-body experiences from quite a scientific perspective. There's also infraliminal sound technology, which is a sound technology that I developed. It's not binaural beat based. People usually assume that, but it's not. It's a completely different thing, and it's focused on getting people to the vibrational state, which is the key stepping stone to out-of-body experiences. Also, there's information about my books, and yeah, also private tuition. I do teach one-to-one for people who want to try and induce their own out-of-body experiences. So that's something I offer online as well.
Wow. I mean, look, I know how intellectual you are. So, you know, you can talk for hours about out-of-body experiences. And I remember you telling me when you had the outer-body experience where you were 6 weeks.
Hello?
Soho. Can you tell everybody about
Sorry, you cut out then. Could you repeat the question? It cut out.
Oh, I'm so sorry. What the outer body experience that you had when you actually were into the future and you saw the bombing of the Admiral Duncan pub in Soho in London.
Yeah, 5
Could
days
you talk
before,
about that?
Sure. Well, it was actually the first time I was ever teaching one of the techniques that I use, called the G technique, which is more of a physical technique. I was teaching that to a few of my friends. Basically, we'd hired a space for this, and I was teaching them all the different nuances of the method. And I actually thought that it wasn't really working. It wasn't really doing anything. I was somewhat distracted, I guess. I didn't feel that maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe the technique wasn't what I thought it was. And almost as soon as I thought this, I had this overwhelming feeling of energy, and I went down onto ground level because I felt unstable. And then I went straight into an out-of-body experience. I found myself drifting through a natural environment, and then I found myself standing on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street in Soho in central London. And then I saw this explosion burst out, the chaos ensue, and then felt an intense emotional wave hit me in the chest. And it kind of put me into a sort of void state. And then eventually some of the other people there brought me back to the room by basically just kind of talking to me or engaging with me and just slowly sort of coaxing me back into the room. So they were aware that something very intense had happened to me. And then I described what I'd seen and that I had this strong feeling that it was precognitive and that there was going to be a bombing in Soho on Old Compton Street in a bar on the right-hand side of the street. So those were the details that I gave. And then 5 days later, there was a bombing in a bar, the Admiral Duncan pub, as you say, on the right-hand side of Old Compton Street, basically exactly as I'd said. So it was the first time I'd ever had anything precognitive happen. I didn't even know if I believed in such a thing. It still makes me struggle to some degree with how can such a thing happen or be possible. It really stretches the realms of possibility, I guess. And yeah, so that was the first time. I also had another experience in 2005 of the 7/7 bombings that happened in London in that year as well. So that one, unfortunately there was no one witnessed that out of body experience, but it was another experience that happened, and they both had these blue gray quality to the vision. So everything I was seeing looked bluish gray. So yeah, those were the experiences I had, and they definitely sent me into an area of thinking about a lot of things, like why people commit violence, but also thinking about precognition and whether it's possible and all those kinds of things. And I then worked with Rupert Sheldrake, who does a lot of research into telepathy and related things in London, and I took part in one of his experiments with precognition and got the highest score he'd seen in a single trial. So that was quite interesting as well, that even the laboratory side of things backed up or sort of confirmed what I'd experienced in a more natural setting. So that was my journey with it so far, really.
Now, let me ask you a couple of questions. Thank you for telling everyone that story, because I found that absolutely fascinating the first time you told it to me. Now, when you are projecting out into the future through an outer body experience, first of all, are you awake or are you asleep? What's your level of consciousness?
I'm never asleep. I don't do out of body experiences from sleep, and I never have. I mean, I've done it once. Well, I've done it a few times, but it's been more just to learn to do it in that way. But for me, it's always a conscious thing, akin to something like deep hypnosis, you could say.
Mm-hmm. And when you have other outer body experiences that are not projecting into the future, what do you see? Are they in color? Because I've seen the blue-gray thing before. I actually had, and I didn't mean to, an outer body experience. I was very uncomfortable with it. Personally, I felt uncomfortable. I was very much looking down at my body, and it felt like just, well, that's a sack of bones. And, you know, I'm just going to float around and do, you know, look around. Now, I saw the blue-gray thing. Even though the room was dark, it didn't matter. I could still see the blue-gray coloring. And that was interesting to me. Do you always see the blue-gray coloring, or what do you actually see?
No, the blue-gray has only appeared in 3, maybe 4 experiences. It's very specific to these very veridical or objective type experiences. 2 of the blue-gray or cerulean, I call them cerulean experiences, 2 of them have been precognitive, and the very first time it happened was the first ever verified out-of-body experience I had, and that one had this blue-grey quality. There was nothing obviously precognitive about that one. It may have had precognitive elements, but there was nothing that could tell me that. It seemed to be just in normal time. So yeah, that was the first one. So no, most of my experiences are in full color, but I do have other types of what I would call duotone experiences, so two-tone experiences, where, for example, there's a yellow-green one that I call the crystalline state. There's different levels and states that I experience where vision can be different. Early stages of out-of-body experiences, especially if someone's new to having the experiences, they often see in a deep violet color. That's common across a lot of people. I've worked with many people over the years, and I've seen that consistently again and again and again, that people will experience that when they're learning at the beginning. But yeah, often there's a full color range as well. So it really depends. It depends on the state of consciousness that you're in at the time of the experience, and how deep you go, and all those kinds of things will impact what you see, and how colors work, how movement works, etc. Because you've got to think that you're not seeing the world with physical eyes. So the way that you see the world is an interpretation, it's constructed from whatever it is that you're actually seeing with, whether that's some kind of extrasensory form, or whether there's some kind of construct that's created by your mind, in the sense of it's taking the data, if you like, the information that's coming into the experience, and then trying to piece together something coherent from that, in much the same way the brain interprets the information that comes from your eyes. What you see is not a direct stream straight from your eyes. It's an interpretation by your brain. So I think out-of-body experiences might be similar.
Wow. You are just amazing. This is why I couldn't wait to have you back on, because your answers are so concise and in-depth. I mean, they're condensed. I know you're sort of condensing them down for us, but they're just, the way you explain everything, your knowledge is just phenomenal. So thank you. Now,
Thanks.
when you were, actually, let me ask you this question. When you see the future in your outer body experience, did you purposefully set that intention, or was that something that came naturally?
No, that came naturally. I didn't set an intention for that. I generally don't set intentions these days. In my early experiences, I generally tried to control the experiences quite a lot, but then I found that the more I did that, it tended to make the experience less powerful in many ways, or take away some of the qualities that were there. When I learned to go with the flow of the experience, I would find that I would have much more profound experiences, that I would see things that were important or relevant. I would be guided to places and to experiences. And so I started to go with the flow of the experiences a lot more, rather than try to control them.
Are there any spirit teams or guides or entities that are actually helping you along your journey when you are in this outer body phase?
Well, there are a couple of, I don't know if they're entities, archetypes, depends how you view things like that. But I have a couple of energies, entities, archetypes, whatever you want to call them, that I work with. Yeah. So those would be the thing. But I don't know what it is that's guiding me, or what it is that that makes me experience these specific things in out of body experiences. I don't know if those two things are related, but I've had experiences of other levels of reality and other levels of consciousness in terms of beings or archetypes. I tend to look at things in quite a similar way to Jung and the idea of the collective unconscious or something like that. So I don't necessarily see them as completely coherent, independent beings. I maybe see them more as archetypal energies or archetypal frameworks that have existed throughout time and that we can access when we have deep kinds of experiences.
So talk about some of the other levels of, I guess maybe you were entering other dimensions or other ascended levels, or what do you see? Can you describe to us like what you see?
Well, it's a really wide range. It can be anything from something that looks like an idyllic natural environment, what has been called in some traditions the like spiritualism, or some pagan traditions, or even Native American traditions talk about an idea of a summerland, this idea of a idyllic nature-like environment. That's one level that I've experienced a lot, and it often has that crystalline quality to it. So the quality of light is very, very sparkling and crystalline and yellow. It feels like sort of sunlight, but on a much more intense level. And that mixed in with like vivid greens of nature and plant life and that kind of thing. So that's quite a basic type level that I've experienced. Then I've had experiences like very similar to, for example, Alex Gray's painting of the universal mind lattice. If you look that up, it's like a fountain of light. And I experienced something very similar where I went into the center of it and felt like I could think and feel with the awareness of millions of people. It felt like all at once. So that was like an expansion of consciousness. Then I've had more afterlife type environments that were quite stereotypical in many ways. The cloudy, misty sort of environment where there didn't seem to be an up or down or anything like that. It was just like a misty, cloudy sort of environment, but there was people within that environment who seemed to be transitioning from one state of awareness to another. So that's another type of environment that I've experienced. And then right through to seeing beings that appeared in really vivid colors of auras, basically like many different auric colors and things like that. So it's a really broad range. I mean, I could probably talk for an hour just on the different types of environments and colors and types of things that I've witnessed in that sense. But it's some people describe very, very coherent environments with cities and people doing jobs and all that. I haven't experienced that kind of thing. I tend to think that's probably lucid dreaming, to be honest.
Now, a couple of things in what you said. The first one where you saw the yellow sunlight crystallized, and can I just ask you, that environment, was it kind of like rolling hills in the background?
There were hills, there were trees, there were fields, meadows. Yeah, I mean, it was lots and lots, lakes, lots of different. It was like a whole world of something very similar to an Earth-like environment, but infused with light and nature, but not much in the way of. I didn't see any people in any of those environments. It was just nature. It was like an empty nature environment.
That's interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. Because when I go up to the spirit world, I can just move my consciousness up to the spirit world. I don't have to necessarily have an outer body experience. I'm just moving my consciousness, and that's exactly what I see in the spirit world. Rolling hills infused with sunlight, but I do see the people walking around, or certainly hologram forms of people walking around. It's sort of like they're just having a it's like a meeting place for friends or family members, and they're just sitting around chatting, and everybody's happy to be there. I've actually seen that myself many times. So I do believe, and I don't know if you agree, because everybody's perception is different. Would you think that that was in the spirit world that you were seeing at that time?
Well, the thing is I'm quite scientific in my outlook, so I sort of want evidence for things. So it could be, but I mean, it depends what you mean by spirit for a start.
Well, yeah,
and then what
yes, of
you mean
course.
by a spirit world. So it's that there's a lot of unpacking has to be done with those terms
Yeah.
and stuff. So for me, I guess I look at it that I try to remain sort of neutral with a lot of things, because I am interested in unraveling what might actually be going on, and how we as physical beings might relate to possibly non-physical things. I'm not even sure they are non-physical. I tend to prefer the term trans-physical, because I think that it's almost like there's an interrelationship between the physical and the so-called non-physical. I think instead of them being separate things, they're interblended things. That's kind of how I look at it. So yeah, I think there's still so much to learn and to unravel with those things that I'm not really sure. The things, the areas that definitely seem to have a relationship to something like a spirit realm, or something that we would experience after physical death, would be the cloud-like environment. That's something that I was able to gain verification from, because it related to a plane crash that actually physically happened, and the people I saw seemed to be the people who died in the plane crash. So there was a direct correlation between something that happened physically and something that happened on that level. So it gave me that degree of confidence that there was an objectivity to it. The problem is we can delude ourselves, and I've done it myself, especially in my early experiences. I had more, I guess, classical, what people would call astral projection experiences, and I realized that quite a lot of them were illusory. And so that made me question a lot of the experiences that I had. So now I try to separate out what are the kind of genuine experiences from the more mental experiences. I don't have those experiences so much anymore, because now I focus on what I would call an out-of-body experience, or an independent consciousness experience, which is my own term, as opposed to astral projection, which does work a lot on imagination or visualization and things like that. And I think that can be problematic, because it can lead you more to illusory things. Same with the lucid dreaming methods for out of body experiences or astral projection, because the lucid dreaming methods can lead to a more subjective experience, and potentially basically you could still be dreaming. It's very hard to prize the two apart in that context. So that's why I'm sort of very careful, because it's happened to me in the past where I've been wrong about those things. So I try to be humble and careful in terms of stating categorically that it's a spirit world or whatever.
Now that makes sense. Now, do you ever actually have any conversations with spirits or entities or other people out there that are doing outer body experiences? I mean, do you ever exchange information or gather information?
I do, but it's not the most common way I do things. But on occasion, I have encountered other beings and had interactions. But again, I'm always kind of holding a question mark. Is this actually another being, or is this an aspect of my own sub or unconscious? So that's sort of where I take it.
And what sort of conversations do you have?
It really depends. There's the more kind of guide-like experiences where it's usually very profound and very deep and related to my own spiritual development or my own sense of moving forward as a person. And then there's experiences where it does seem to be more like I'm encountering someone else having an outward experience, or someone who's recently passed. But it tends to often be more of a telepathic type experience, almost like where you're sharing thoughts rather than a conversation in the everyday sense of the word.
Oh gosh, I have so many questions for you, and I know we don't have a lot of time. So here's one question, and I'm intrigued now. I do a process called the CTT, which is the Consciousness Transformation Technique. It basically, as I understand it, you're traveling and we go into the past lives and we're picking up pieces of your soul puzzle that were, exchanged when you experienced a highly traumatic event. So something happened that was so traumatic that it shattered your soul. A piece fell on that timeline. You're going back in time. We're picking it back up. We're putting that soul piece back inside of you. We're tapping out negatives from that event. And then, your consciousness actually does expand. It's like an enlightenment, a reveal, a way of processing. Have you ever traveled in a past life from an outer body experience? Have you ever traveled to a past life and retrieved any of your soul pieces that may be laying around due to traumatic events, whether it's in this lifetime or a past life?
Well, see, that's heavily belief system based.
Yeah, I know, but
I think there's evidence for past life memory in children. There's some good evidence for that. But whether that's a form of psychic information that those children are picking up, or whether it's actually a past life, is a different question. I was friends with Erlander Haraldsson before he died, who was one of the researchers who worked with Ian Stevenson, and we talked a lot about the idea of reincarnation and past lives. And I think the strongest evidence for them existing was basically things like birthmarks that seemed to correlate with wounds that they'd experienced in previous lives. Most children that have past life memories seem to remember dying traumatically or quickly in the previous life, and so therefore it's almost like they're trying to resolve something by returning to some degree. So I'm open to that, but I'm not convinced either. And when you say soul, again, what does that mean? What is a soul? Where, so it's a tricky one. But no, I haven't traveled back into a past life. I've had things that have come up. I've had images, visions that would suggest a past life in certain parts of the world, and certain words and terminologies that seem to relate, doing calligraphy that seemed to be Arabic writing, and some words that related to a specific place in at that time India, but what would now be Pakistan. So I've had some interesting correlations, but again, I'm very careful not to jump too far into making assumptions about what that means, because again, I think it could be tapping into that collective unconscious, or that interconnected consciousness that we experience in different states of consciousness. But again, we can't be sure what we're tuning into, and whether it's just an aspect of ourselves or something bigger. So I'm always trying to get to the truth. So I try not to go too far with my sort of belief systems and whatever. Maybe on an intuitive level, I'm always open to it. I always kind of, if you like, suspend my disbelief. I assume that it's real, to give it the benefit of the doubt, if you like, to see what happens. But I haven't done much work specifically with past lives other than what I just mentioned, where I had things like I started writing calligraphy in Arabic, and I had these words and images and things coming into my mind. So that was really interesting, because a Pakistani friend came to my house and saw this calligraphy that I'd been doing on the wall. I had them up on the wall in my studio when I was more of an artist, and she said, "Who did these?" And I said, "I did." And she was quite surprised, because she said, this is Arabic characters, and I had no idea that that's what I was doing. So yeah.
Let me ask this question then. When you were doing the calligraphy, when you traveled with that outer body experience, how did you, so were you writing the calligraphy as you were having that experience, or was
it was
that
nothing to do with out of body experiences? I don't just do out of body experiences.
Oh, well, that's true. How did you pick up on the calligraphy?
I was just tuning in. I'm very naturally gifted with going into trance states, which is what facilitates my out of body experiences. But I also use trance states just to, work on a spiritual level in general. I do scrying, which is, staring into a reflective surface in order to have visionary perceptions. I do dowsing. I do, all different kinds of practices. Seething, which is a physical movement trance practice. So I do a lot of things to work with my consciousness, my energies, my body, in order to alter my state of consciousness and work in that way. So on this particular day, I guess it was related to sigils, or like working with personalized symbols and things like that. So I was just tuning in, letting these patterns and images just form and take shape. So I was just working with trance states, essentially.
That intrigues me as well, because language and culture are conscious mind constructs. Now, the reason I've come up with that is because I can do, and you know a lot about remote viewing. So I use a version of remote viewing where I can tap into anybody. And that's what basically I do on my channel. I'm tapping in and pulling information from various individuals and entities all over the world, and on plane and off plane, right? And I can talk to people that are not native English speakers, or do they have any English speaking abilities. And I don't speak Chinese or Indian or whatever the language is, but they communicate back to me in English. And so we're having a full-blown conversation. I'm pulling the information. So that I find that quite fascinating, that you were pulling information about language and what level of consciousness that was coming in at. Also, that leads me to ask the question of whether or not maybe somebody was automated writing through you, or you tapped into their level of consciousness. I mean, can you go deeper into that? Can you explain?
See, this is what I mean, where it becomes tricky in terms of belief systems, because I was telling that because it felt something related to a past life. In fact, for me, that's how it felt.
I see.
That's why I brought it up in relation to your past life memory. So it was almost like me from another time, and I was tuning into that.
Okay.
But your interpretation is, someone working through me or tuning into another level. So this is where it can be very tricky in terms of what you personally believe about a specific thing. So that's why it's very good just to take, ask only what are the facts kind of thing is
no, I understand, but that you, just from my perspective, where I can tune in and everybody speaks my language, because they understand it at a subconscious level, that's how they can communicate with me, and they do so. So the conscious mind, to me, my perception is that language and culture and things like that are held in a level of the conscious mind as opposed to the subconscious. But that was interesting. Now, going into remote viewing and the fact that you are at the Rhine, do you ever mix modality, your OBE or any of the things that you do with remote viewing?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, well, actually, at the Rhine, I did a 14-week study, 14 weeks of experiments where I was given targets, visual images that were actually they were selected in the future. So it was basically I was told to perceive, remote view, out of body perceive, whatever, these images before they were actually selected. So it was a precognitive as well as remote viewing or remote perception, non-local perception, however you want to call it, experiment. So we did that over 14 weeks with the Rhine, and I had to try and perceive them ahead of time. And interestingly, it was the out of body experience ones that I got the most clear 100% sort of hits on. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting to me. But yeah, I used Gansfeld Techniques, which is mild sensory deprivation, using ping pong balls over the eyes and a red light shone in your eyes, which causes your pupils to dilate, which then causes your brain to search for images. But then when there isn't any images coming in, the brain starts to pick them up and create them or tune into them. So you're more likely to perceive things psychically. And you also have pink noise or white noise playing through headphones. So again, it's to create this almost like a blank canvas for your mind to put images onto. So I used that methodology. I used remote viewing, a couple of different variations on it, kind of have my own way of approaching that as well. And then also out of body experiences. So yeah, I used a few different methods when doing that. It was a great opportunity because obviously over 14 weeks, that's a lot of time to experiment with perceiving things. And the targets were selected in the US, and I was at the time living in Estonia. So there was no way that I could get any kind of information on what the targets were or anything like that. So it was a great opportunity for me to explore my abilities and explore those kind of techniques.
Wow. When are you holding another course at the Rhine?
We have one scheduled for August. So yeah, there'll be one then.
And that's in person?
No, that will be an online course.
Okay. And what will you be doing? What will you be teaching?
I'll be teaching methods of out-of-body experiences and the science, and going into all of the areas, really, everything from my experiences, what they've taught me, the techniques that I use and that I've developed, how to select the right technique for the individual, and then applying it and learning about basically what the science tells us, the clues that it gives us of how we can improve on maybe what the techniques of the past have given us. There's definitely things that we've learned scientifically that can improve upon past techniques, etc.
Wow. And your course that you offer for OBE, can you tell us, like, how intensive is it? What do people learn? What do they do?
It's a pretty much purely practical based course. So even when I talk about the science and the research that I've taken part in, and also the science that's out there, and even like near-death experiences and things like that, I'm relating it back to how that information can help you in a practical way to learn to have your own experiences. So the whole focus of the course is to have your own experiences. I think it runs at about 10 hours plus my practical book, plus the infraliminal audio tracks that I've developed. So you can get the whole package basically. And there's even an option to have the whole package plus an hour's private tuition with me. So there's that package as well. So there's 3 different options basically. So
wow. I mean, you're just phenomenal. And how many books have you written so far?
I've written 2 books and also co-authored 2 other books where I've contributed a chapter to them. So yeah.
And you have a new book coming out soon?
Well, it's the 10th anniversary edition of my second book, the practical one that I wrote. So basically, I'm updating it with the new science. I'm putting in a new chapter, focus more on the research I've done and ideas about the afterlife and all that kind of thing. So looking into that in a bit more depth. So it's going to have a couple of new chapters in there. It's going to have about different states, like the void state, which I hadn't really gone deeply into when I wrote the book 10 years ago. So the new version will go into some new discoveries that I've made since then, including the importance of flow states, which is another area that I've discovered in the last sort of 10 years.
What do you mean by the void states?
Well, many people are aware of the vibrational state as the precursor to an out-of-body experience. So it's an electrical feeling, vibratory feeling that you'll have when you're ready to have an out-of-body experience. Basically, it's like the car engine's running. It's sort of, it's telling you that you're ready to go, basically. So a lot of people are familiar with that, but it's not, I call them transitional stages. It's not the only transitional stage that people experience. It's just one of them. It's probably in the region of 60% of people will have that particular one, the vibrations, but there are others, and the void state is one of the others. The void state is essentially, it's like you're in a very, very basic level of consciousness where you're aware of yourself, you're consciously aware, but you're not having any complex thoughts, and there's no visuals or sound. It's just, you're just conscious. That's it. It's like a basic level conscious awareness. And then from that basic level of conscious awareness, it develops into an out-of-body experience. So it's another way of going. It's usually associated more with people who do have out-of-body experiences more from a lucid dreaming or dreaming sleep type state. But it's it's maybe about 30% of people will report something like a void state, at least either just before the experience or just before they go out of body or just after they go out of body. In most instances I've encountered, it's prior to leaving the body.
So do you feel that when you have this outer body experience that you drop a lot of your emotional attachments to the earth plane? Am I perceiving that wrong?
I don't know why I would want to drop my attachments to the earth plane. I think the earth plane might be the superior plane. It's sort of, I don't really get into hierarchies and this is better and that's worse and all that kind of thing. I think that's religious sort of thinking, and I think religion is quite damaging and toxic. So I tend to think that, I tend to look more in a non-dual kind of way, that we should embrace everything and the physical is just as important, if not more important. So that's sort of how I look at it. So I'm not trying to drop anything, but I find that it's very emotional. It's a very emotionally uplifting experience and very transformative, and frees us from maybe emotional baggage from the past or things like that often. And there's a sense of interconnectedness and oneness, and can lead us more towards more compassionate ways of life and things like that, which is, I think, the most important thing, the golden rule. That's sort of what it all comes down to. I think we need to strip away belief systems more than embrace them, I think, is my approach to life.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Are you still vegan?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. I remember you telling me that. No, I just find that the level of consciousness here on the earth plane is very heavy, right? and it's fraught with a lot of emotions about having to live here on the earth plane, you know, like struggle, especially when it comes to, you know, money, familial relationships, things like that. So I was wondering if maybe when you drifted out of your, did that sort of those emotional, that heaviness sort of, you know, leave you or stay on that earth plane level as you are lifting out of your body. That's what I meant by that.
Sure. I guess I wouldn't blame that on the physical, though. I would put that more down to those are all choices and emotional experiences that we have. That we can choose to live in different ways. To the mainstream, for example, we can move away from social media. We can move away from consumerism and capitalism. We can make those choices on that level, and then also we can work on our own emotional stuff, I guess you could say. So I don't think that's to do with the physical as such. That's to do with, in many ways, the political structures that surround us that we might be engaged with. So I think that's more, I mean, especially sort of in the UK and the US, there's a very power centric ideology that dominates most of society. And I think, for example, when I lived in Estonia, the attitude towards nationalism, the country, nature, religion, all of those things was very, very different to what I've experienced living in the UK or when I've visited the US. So I think it can also be very different depending on where you choose to live and things like that as well.
Yeah, and that sort of solidifies my theory that those things are conscious mind constructs, but they're not actually
Sure, yeah.
What's going on, you know, underneath the conscious mind, that connection that we have to the universe, which is, you know, existing below the conscious mind. Thank you for that clarification. And one last question. Have you ever found, because I know everybody will want to know this, have you ever found somewhere in the universe on your travels a place of manifestation, or where you can tap into manifesting?
Can you be a bit more specific what you mean?
So yes, so a lot of times people will use various techniques to manifest things in their life. So, you know, they have vision
Magic.
boards. Yeah, you know, they have vision boards, or they have hypnotherapy or techniques. Have you found anything on your travels that is actually like a center point of manifestation, and you were able to tap into that?
Well, I guess, you know, this does come back to magic and esoteric approaches. I mean, traditionally, the idea within many magical systems is that you create something within the astral planes, and then that thing will then manifest in the physical planes. That's the sort of oldest idea, I guess, within Western magic, is this idea that what you create in those kinds of areas will then manifest in the physical. So I've had experiences of, I guess you could say, of something very similar to that. I don't know if it's exactly the same as what was being talked about in esoteric writings, but there are levels of that reality that are very malleable and very susceptible to conscious awareness and to visualization and to the creative aspects of the human mind. So what you create in those kind of levels seems to then, over time, start to manifest in a physical reality. I'm not sure I would say it's a specific place, but it seems to be maybe a specific level, which I guess you could say is a place, but a specific kind of point in your own consciousness when you go to a significantly deep level or high level, whichever way you want to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I would look at it.
Are you saying that, sorry, let me just see if I get this right. So we create, because thought forms are energy. So we create the thought form of what we want. We put it out into the universe. And then, so therefore, that is in existence. And it's our job to tap into that thought form and pull it down to the earth plane in order to make it manifest. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, I think the esoteric belief is just that if you create that thought form and then you put it into the astral plane, or you put it into that other level, it will then naturally manifest. That is the kind of process. I don't think you have to sort of pull it down necessarily. I mean, actually, in many magical practices, the idea is to forget about it, to forget that you even did it, because the conscious mind or the imagination or whatever can actually get in the way of the manifestation of it, or the lust of result, as it's been called in esoteric circles. So those things can get in the way of the manifestation. So in many ways, it's like you plant the seed and then you leave it alone to do its thing. So yeah, I think that's kind of more how it's seen. And that does seem to ring true of how I've experienced it as well. So whether, again, it's specifically all the details are correct in terms of how the esoteric schools talked about it is up for debate. But there does seem to be something for creating something very intensely with all of the sensory experience. If you think about a ritual, for example, it usually uses sight, smell, sound, like all of the senses to create a very intense, vivid interpretation of something. And then when that's put out into the world, then that, or into the universe, that will then manifest in some form. So that's really, I think that idea seems to be pretty consistent. I've seen throughout my life examples of that kind of thing, and examples of guidance and all of that. So how exactly that's working, what the mechanisms exactly are that cause that, I don't know. But I think that the same way, I think that psychic abilities are real, but we don't know exactly how they work yet, is an example of a similar thing. So there are these aspects of life that are fascinating, that show that life is a lot more interconnected and expansive than we imagine, but also it's still kind of exciting because we don't know exactly how they all work. And I'm quite fascinated by trying to unravel how they work.
You're so amazing. And our hour is up, and I'm so disappointed because I have 1,000 other questions for you. I would advise everybody listening, you must get Graham Nicholls' books. If you're wanting to engage in an outer body experience training, Graham is your man. I just can't reiterate that enough, because a lot of people do ask me about outer body experiences. And quite frankly, Graham, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little frightened of them. However, you're not. And
there's nothing to be frightened of.
Yeah, I know. I think it's because I feel like I'm not in control. And I would recommend that people should take your course, because you would teach how to have it in a controlled sort of way, obviously in a free thinking way.
The best way to have control with anything is to learn the subject deeply and to develop the skills deeply. I think that's what gives you safety and control with anything. If you're going to drive a car, you need to learn to do it safely. You need to learn all of the rules and regulations. It's like with anything. But I think it's a nonsense that there's any kind of danger with out of body experiences. I've been doing it over 30 years. I've looked into every avenue and aspect of it, and I've never seen any evidence that there's anything harmful about out of body experiences. I think quite the opposite. There's more evidence, a lot more evidence, that it's a healing and positive experience and transformative experience. So I really don't think there's any basis to that. I think it's those ideas that there's some kind of harm or that it's dangerous in some way. I think it's just superstition from the past, the same way, people used to think, I don't know, any kind of spiritual practice, unless it was a religion, was in some way harmful or whatever.
Wow. And if anybody wants to learn about Graham Nicholls, please go to his website, grahamnichols.com. Graham, thank you so much for being with us today. Please, please, please come back and talk to me again. And I'm going to get your books. I'm going to start. I really want to sign up for your course. I tell you, after today, I do. I want to sign up.
I'd love to come back on. I'm sorry I couldn't spare a bit more time today, but if we do it again, I'd be happy to go a bit more in depth and we could talk for longer.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And everybody out there, you must check out Graham's work at grahamnichols.com. Graham, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time today.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you.